Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Danae Barkey, the Executive Director of HCU Network America, and I'm so glad you could join us tonight for Fueling a Physical Active Lifestyle on a Low Protein Diet. This program highlights the strong partnership between HCU Network America and the MSUD Family Support Group as we work together to support individuals and families living with rare metabolic disorders. Tonight's discussion will focus on how people with MSUD and HCU can safely stay active, enjoy movement, and support their health through informed nutrition choices. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our generous sponsor, Nutricia, for making this educational event possible. It is my pleasure to introduce Denise Kowalski, Executive
That's okay.
Director of the MSUD Family Support Group.
Thank you, Danae. I'm Denise Kolovoski, the Executive Director of the MSUD Family Support Group. Welcome to everyone and happy holidays. Thanks for joining us this evening. The MSUD Family Support Group, we're excited to collaborate with the HCU Network America on this important topic, supporting an active lifestyle while managing rare metabolic conditions. It's my honor to introduce our speaker, Dr. Karen Dolins. Dr. Dolins is a registered dietitian with a private practice in White Plains, New York. She teaches graduate level nutrition at Teachers College, Columbia University, where she also earned her doctoral degree in nutrition after completing a BA in biology at Washington University. She also serves as a key contact for the MSUD Family Support Group Scientific Advisory Board, connecting researchers and clinicians with the group's ongoing and future projects. She's also a mother of Hannah Dolins, who has classic MSUD and lives in Scarsdale, New York, with her husband, Jerry. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Karen Dolins.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to hopefully share my screen. That seemed to have worked, right? Okay. So I can't see you guys. You can see me, but I don't have the usual feedback of being able to see my audience. So I'm going to be talking about well, I'm going to go this way. We're gonna talk about just why physical activity is encouraged for people with both MSUD and HCU. We're going to talk about general sports nutrition guidelines and how anyone would fuel their activity so that they get the most out of their workouts. And then we're going to talk about how we can apply those sports nutrition guidelines when following an MSUD and HCU diet. And of course, the disclaimer is that what we're providing here this evening is general information only. It is not a prescription for anyone. So please do discuss this with your providers. I want to thank those of you who completed the little questionnaire that we sent out. It was really very helpful to me in preparing for this. We didn't ask all these questions, but these are some of the things that we're going to address this evening. And if you have questions as we move along, I encourage you to put them in the chat box, and we will have a Q&A at the end. So, some of you may want to be more physically active, but concerned about how that might control your disease, how that might affect your ability to control your disease. And so we have this overall riding question of is it safe for people with these metabolic disorders to exercise? And that's something that scientists are really just starting to look at now. I know that in the questionnaires, you were pretty much split between having a concern that too much exercise might affect your control and those who really weren't concerned. Some of you might feel that you want to be active, but unsure whether you would have enough energy given your dietary restrictions. And some of you may be concerned that your protein restriction may make it difficult to benefit from physical activity. And so we're going to address those issues as well. And hopefully by the end of this evening's conversation, you'll feel a little more comfortable about all this. So first to start, the US government does publish physical activity guidelines that are applicable to all Americans. And just briefly, the guidelines encourage people of all ages to engage in physical activity because we know how important it is for health. For kids who are preschool age, we just want them to be out there having fun, not sitting in front of a TV screen. Children and adolescents are advised to be physically active for at least 60 minutes a day. And that activity should include activities that are going to strengthen muscle and bone, as well as the cardiovascular system, which is your heart and your lungs, essentially. For adults, the recommendation is to engage in moderate intensity activities, something like brisk walking, at least 150 minutes a week, and to perform muscle strengthening activities at least 2 days a week. So for example, lifting weights. And what's really important, I think, for all of us to acknowledge is that the guidelines make a special point of saying that people with disabilities or chronic diseases are also encouraged to follow these guidelines. This is all on the website that the government has for physical activity guidelines, so you can refer to that if you want. They call it Move Your Way, and that's because it really doesn't matter what you're doing as long as you're moving your body. And again, the guidelines for adults, at least 150 minutes a week of any of these different activities, along with the strength training activities as well. Why is this important? Well, there is just so much knowledge we have about all the different ways in which being physically active and being physically fit will improve our health as well as our sense of well-being. So we know that physical fitness can help reduce a risk of a heart attack, lower blood cholesterol levels, lower the risk of some cancers. It strengthens our bones and muscles, helps people manage their weight, lowers the risk of diabetes, lowers blood pressure, and also helps anyone have more energy and improves mood. So the benefits are both physical as well as emotional. And I know that some of these are particularly pertinent to the HCU community. Not only that, but clinicians in the field of inborn errors of metabolism recognize that physical activity can be helpful in other ways. There's just so much that we feel we don't have control over in our lives with these metabolic diseases, and physical activity can give us a sense of control. It improves the quality of life. Again, when we're more physically fit, we have more energy. Very often people will say they just don't have the energy to go out and take a walk or do something physical, get on the bike, go for a swim. But actually, the more fit you are, the better your body is able to take in oxygen and use that oxygen to have more energy. So this is the number one question. Is it safe to be physically active if you have an inborn error of metabolism? And I have to be frank, research in this area is just beginning. There was actually one study for 8 people with HCU that I'm going to show you a little bit later on that found that it was safe. And there have been no studies looking at MSUD. We'll come back to that as well. However, we do know anecdotally, just from talking to everybody, that people are engaged in sport and physical activity. We know many of our children are involved in teams, and of course, this helps them to feel like they're part of their cohort. It helps with socialization as well as physical fitness. And we know that many adults are exercising. And I think it's really important to recognize that a metabolic crisis from physical activity has not been reported. So while the science is slow in coming, and hopefully that will be changing, we don't have reason to believe that something terrible is going to happen if a person goes out and exercises. For PKU, there is more evidence. There are several studies looking at physical activity in PKU, and now they have updated their guidelines to include the need to be physically active. But we do know that people who are working with individuals with either MSUD or HCU are really encouraging physical activity just for overall health and well-being for just about everyone with these conditions. So I think I have a slide that is in the wrong place here. So I think that somehow some slides got lost. So I'm going to take this opportunity to apologize. I was talking a little bit about aerobic and anaerobic activities. Aerobic means that you're using oxygen. So that's when you're doing an activity and you feel that you're breathing heavier, right? And that's because your lungs are taking in more oxygen. And then your blood is carrying that oxygen to the muscles where they can use it to get energy from foods. Anaerobic is something that happens so quickly that we don't have time to take in the oxygen and transport the oxygen and the nutrients to the muscle cell. So it relies on nutrients that are in the muscle themselves and that don't need oxygen to be metabolized. So an example of aerobic activity would be something like going for a walk, a jog. I know on the questionnaires, a number of you said you were walking or jogging. Swimming is aerobic, bike riding. Anaerobic would be lifting weights, that's anaerobic, or doing a sprint. It's very high intensity. Your muscles need to get that energy very quickly. And so they, again, are able to metabolize these fuels and get energy without oxygen. But of course, if you're doing a sprint, you're going to get tired much more quickly than if you're doing a slow, comfortable jog. And that's because while we can get energy quickly without oxygen, we can't get it for very long. So we're very quickly going to get fatigued. Now, there are some sports that have both aerobic and anaerobic components. Things like soccer or tennis or basketball, where you may be running across the court at very high intensities, but then you'll have other periods of lower intensity. And in that case, you're going to be using these different energy systems. So I wanted to give you that background so that you could understand why these recommendations for fueling physical activity make sense. And that's essentially what sports nutrition is. It's providing guidelines to fuel your body in a way that's going to best support physical activity. And of course, it's essential. If you want to perform your best, proper fueling is going to be essential. We need to be eating the right foods at the right times. If we do that, we're going to be able to get the most out of workouts. What do I mean by that? When we do a workout, if we're going for a jog, for example, what we're doing is stimulating our body to make changes that are going to improve our fitness. But the actual changes and improvement to the fitness happen during the recovery period from the workout. And if we're not well fueled, we're not going to be able to make the same level of changes that we could if we were well fueled. So, for example, probably no one on this screen would do that, but many of the athletes that I work with might go to an early morning training session without having breakfast. And they can get through their workout, but they're actually wasting some of that effort because they're not going to be able to get the same benefit as they would have if they had had something to eat before they went to that workout. Fueling also helps us recover quickly after each training session. And if you're a competitive athlete, it's going to help you perform your best. So, whenever I give a workshop on sports nutrition to teams or whoever it might be, I ask this question. There are 6 groups of nutrients: carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals, and water. And I'm gonna invite you to use your chat box and vote on which one you think is the most important. So I'll give you just a few seconds to do that. And Danae will let me know if Danae, you can just let me know what people are saying. Danae, if you want to unmute and tell me what people are saying.
Apologies. It's about split 50-50 between carbs and water. We have one person with fats.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And this is very typical of the response that I get with other audiences as well, that people are really unclear. And, that's why I think it's so important for us to have this conversation, because there just is so much misinformation out there in the world. What I want you to always remember is that no single nutrient is any more important than another. And that's because they all work together like a team. So, for example, could you say that a pitcher is the most important person on a baseball team and it really doesn't matter who you have on first or second base or in the outfield? No, you could have, 5 fantastic pitchers, but if you don't have the rest of the team all working together, you're not going to win many ball games. And it's the same with nutrition. We need all of those different nutrients, but we need them in the right proportion to one another in order to be able to function our best. So let's start with a little bit of a conversation about energy, because energy is what it's all about, right? When we're talking about physical performance and physical activity, we're talking about fueling our muscles. And when we're talking about fueling our muscles, we're talking about giving them energy. And we measure energy in calories. So a calorie is a unit of energy. And it's, very interesting because a lot of people will say that they want to have a lot of energy, but they don't want to have a lot of calories. And it doesn't really work that way because calories are units of energy. So, in order to get the most out of your workout, it's important to match the amount of energy that your body needs with the amount of energy you're giving yourself through your diet. So we need obviously that energy for muscle performance, but we also need it just for our body's own, the whole business of keeping our body alive. So keeping our lungs breathing, our heart beating, keeping our body warm, keeping our brain working. All that takes a tremendous amount of energy. Kids, of course, need more energy for growth and development. And so it's very important that when we're thinking about how much energy we need for physical activity, that we make sure that we're taking care of our body's essential needs as well, and not just thinking about what we need, what my app has told me I need to perform this particular activity. This is particularly important for all of us here, and that's because when we don't take in the amount of energy we need, our muscles will break down. If our muscles are breaking down, we're releasing amino acids into our bloodstream, and our blood amino acid levels are going to rise. And that's a problem for all of us here. Now, typically with exercise, the muscle breakdown will release amino acids, in particular branched chain amino acids, that can be used for energy. But people with MSUD cannot use branched chain amino acids for energy. That pathway is blocked. With HCU, of course, the concern is that methionine levels and homocysteine levels will rise. Now, luckily, we really don't need to use protein to fuel our muscles. What we need is energy coming from fat and sugar. And the form of sugar that every cell in our body, including our brain and our central nervous system, uses is called glucose. So again, most of the energy to fuel activity comes from fat and sugar. At low levels of intensity, we're using more fat. At higher levels of intensity, we're using more sugar. So if we're going for a walk, we're going to be using more fat. As we start to switch into a jog, we're going to start using more sugar. If we're doing a sprint, we're only going to be using sugar for fuel because fat has to have oxygen to get energy from it. And as we said, that high intensity exercise cannot use oxygen. We just need that energy way too fast. So what that means is that we really need a high carbohydrate diet to make sure that we always have plenty of sugar or glucose available, because no matter who we are, no matter how lean we are, we all have enough fat to fuel the muscle. No one's going to run out of fat. But it's different with sugar because fat stores are, we can continue storing more and more fat. There's no limit. But with sugar, we only store a little bit in our liver and in our muscle. And if we don't have enough carbohydrate in our diet, then the body's going to say, uh-oh, I don't have this energy source that I need. And so what is it going to do? It's going to start to break down the muscle and release the amino acids. And again, normally branched chain amino acids will be used to fuel muscles, but for people with MSUD, that pathway is blocked. Methionine is less directly involved in energy metabolism, but still is involved through multiple pathways. So here's a little picture. Don't worry. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. This is what I thought was earlier on. I guess I had moved it. So here is the muscle. Do you see my cursor? Yes, okay. So this is the muscle. And this is signifying that this muscle is using energy. ATP is what the energy currency is for the muscle. So when I say we're using sugar and fat, we're breaking that down and forming ATP, and that ATP is what allows the muscle to do work. So where is that sugar and fat coming from? Well, the liver, as I said, stores some sugar or glucose. It stores it in something called glycogen. And the fat cells store fats. So through the bloodstream at rest and also during aerobic activity, the sugar that's released from the liver is going to go through the bloodstream to the muscle, and the same with the fatty acids from the fat stores. And so we're going to be able to use that along with oxygen that's going to be delivered also through the blood, and we're going to be able to use that to get energy. Very little protein is used for fuel by exercising muscles. So, that's a very major point, I think, for you to be aware of, that the fact that you're on a protein limited diet does not mean that your muscles are going to be deprived of fuel, because under any circumstance, muscle does not use much protein at all. So I get this question a lot, aren't too many carbs bad for you? Don't they turn into sugar? And that one is always really interesting, because the fact is that when we eat any food, that food gets broken down into molecules that can be used by the different cells of our body. Our body doesn't use protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Our body uses amino acids, glucose, and fatty acids. So yes, when we eat a food that's high in carbohydrate, it's broken down into glucose. And that's because that's the form that every cell of your body will use for energy. So it's not a bad thing that sugars are broken down into glucose, or that carbohydrates are broken down into glucose. That's essential. That's what we need for the cells of our body to be able to be functional. Glucose can be used, it is very unique, because we can use it for both high intensity anaerobic work like sprints, or for low intensity. It's the only nutrient that we can use at any exercise intensity. So it really is critical. In fact, it is so critical that for people on a low carbohydrate diet, which I assume is no one here, but in general, people on a low carbohydrate diet, what they don't realize is that they're going to be breaking down more muscle because they don't have that fuel source. So the fact that metabolic diets tend to be high in carbohydrate, for physical activity, that's actually a good thing. Good sources of carbohydrates for people with a metabolic condition are your formula, low protein breads, cereals, pastas, and fruits and vegetables. All of those are excellent sources of carbohydrate. Now let's talk about protein, because I know that some people are concerned that with the protein restriction, they're just not going to be able to benefit as much from physical activity and see the same kinds of improvements in fitness. So how can I get enough protein to build muscle and strength? Well, rest assured that your metabolic diet, the way it's prescribed to you, is giving you the amount of protein that you need. And there are a lot of people who believe that you need to eat more protein and take protein shakes if you want to build muscle, but they're actually mistaken. That's actually not the case. Eating more protein does not build muscle. Some clinicians may advise you to take some extra formula. And again, that depends on your own individual prescription. If your clinician feels that maybe you would benefit from a little more protein, they can increase the formula, but there's no other need for extra protein, and there's no indication that people on metabolic formulas are at disadvantages. And actually, I know in the PKU world, there are people who have been talking about their journeys with bodybuilding and their success with bodybuilding on a metabolic diet. And I know from personal experience with my daughter, who's been doing some working out in the gym, she's getting much stronger than she was. So just little anecdotal bits of information to assure you that you can build muscle, you can build strength. The key to building muscle is doing the work. You have to do the strength training, and you need calories, because if you want to build muscle, you have to have enough calories to support that muscle building process. Just kind of like if you want to build a house, it takes energy, right? There's inputs that have to go into it. It's the same thing. You can't be eating inadequate calories and expect to build muscle. So I put this on here just because I want to show you, in reality, our muscle, the proteins in our muscle are continually being built up and broken down. And that happens regularly throughout the day. So when we eat a meal, we see an increase in making new protein. In the time between meals, we see more muscle protein breakdown. So we're building and we're breaking down throughout the day. You can see, I think, you can get a pretty good sense that if you're having your formula at 7 o'clock and then you're not having much else to eat until later in the afternoon, that you're going to be breaking down a lot more muscle protein than you're building. And that shows you how important, I hope you can see from this, just how important it is to be having food and formula at regular intervals throughout the day. Now, the interesting thing about this is what happens when we go to the gym and we pump some iron. You'll see that same thing is happening here with protein, muscle protein being made, muscle protein being broken down. But if we have a workout and we've had a meal that contains protein, when we go back to building muscle, we're going to build more muscle than we would have without that training session. So we're always building muscle and breaking down, but by adding training and adding the right meals at the right time, we're increasing the amount of new muscle that we're building, and we're decreasing a little bit the amount of breakdown. And that's how over time we're going to build muscle. So if you want to build muscle, it's important to do the strength training 2 to 3 times a week. Make sure you're getting enough calories because it takes energy to build muscle. And for best results, you want to divide your formula into 3 to 4 servings a day. Not have it once or twice, but as regularly as possible throughout the day. Current suggestions are to have that formula within 3 hours of starting your workout and within 1 hour of finishing. Now, I want to emphasize again, we don't know this from researching people with HCU and MSUD. These are the recommendations for the general public, and we are assuming that it would be the same for people with metabolic conditions, because there's no reason to believe that anything different would occur. So after your workout, you want to have your formula. It doesn't have to be immediately after, it could be an hour after. But then remember, to build muscle takes energy, and we need carbohydrate as well, because we need to replace the fuel that we use. So we want to add some fruit, low protein bread or cereal or coconut milk or yogurt for those carbohydrates as well. It's really important to stay hydrated. First of all, from a performance perspective, we know that when people lose more than 2% of their body weight, they don't perform as well. So for example, a person who weighs 120 pounds should not lose more than 2.4 pounds while they're exercising. But the amount of fluid that everyone needs is very different. That's the first problem. The second problem is that our sense of thirst does not adequately keep us hydrated, especially when we're physically active. So if we're just responding to thirst, we're not going to be adequately hydrating ourselves. And that's why scientists recommend that athletes drink to a schedule, not to thirst. For people with MSUD and HCU, I strongly would encourage you to consider a sports drink, especially for a workout that's longer than 45 minutes, because they're going to provide a source of energy. If you have a sports drink that has a sports drink, the definition is one that provides fluids, carbohydrates, and electrolytes. And they're designed because having that sports drink will keep fluid in your body better than just drinking water or just drinking electrolytes will. Not only that, but the sugar that's in the sports drink helps prevent muscle breakdown, and that's really important for our community. Sports scientists agree there is no need to supplement electrolytes. That's become a big marketing ploy lately, where, when you listen to people talk about how you have to have protein shakes and you have to have electrolyte supplements, none of that is backed up by the science. And so people who are studying these things are finding that no, you don't need to supplement electrolytes. There's plenty of electrolytes in your formula, and there's plenty of electrolytes in just about everything you eat. So if you have your formula and you have food, your electrolytes are covered. Also, vitamin and mineral supplements beyond what you're going to get from your formula is also not necessary for athletic performance. Timing is essential. So we encourage anyone to eat 3 meals and snacks. You need to be fueling yourself throughout the day. As I mentioned, you want to have something within 3 hours of a workout so that the fuel and the fluids are in adequate supply. Again, during a long workout, I highly recommend a sports drink. It's going to help maintain your blood sugar, as well as electrolytes and hydration. And afterwards, we just need a regular meal and formula, along with fluids, and that's going to help our body recover. And when I say adapt, I'm referring to making those changes that are being stimulated by the workout that we did. So what do we know about the nutritional needs of people with inborn errors of metabolism who are engaging in physical activity? I've already told you, we know very little. So here's the one study I mentioned earlier. Danae actually gave me this one on homocystinuria and exercise, and it really is actually a very well done study, but it's only one study. So what they did was they took 6 adults who had HCU, and then they matched them with 6 controls, so healthy people who did not have HCU. And they put them on an exercise bike, and they had them exercise at a moderate intensity. So they weren't sprinting on the bike, they weren't out of breath, they were going at a comfortable pace for 30 minutes. Before they did this, they gave them a diet that was calculated to give them the amount of energy and protein that they needed. And then they tested their blood before the workout, after the workout, 1.5 hours after, and 24 hours after. And what they found was that 30 minutes of this moderate intensity cycling did not affect homocysteine levels. So that's wonderful. However, we need more research, right? We need to know, what about people who are exercising for an hour? What about people who are doing more high intensity exercise? What about people who are doing strength training? So we still have a million questions that need to be answered, but this at least tells us that for most of us, we really don't have to worry that our levels are going to get thrown off by some moderate physical activity. Unfortunately, for MSUD, there have been no studies, and we're actually planning to do one here in New York. So if anyone on this webinar is an adult in the New York area and would like to participate, please let me know. MSUD is different because leucine, which is one of the branched chain amino acids, plays an important role in exercise and energy metabolism. And one of the things it does is stimulate muscle protein synthesis. Well, but of course, we know that people with MSUD, even when they're well controlled, they're going to have higher leucine levels than anyone else. And that's still the case post-transplant. Post-transplant, at least for the means, the averages, most people will still have leucine levels that are above that of people without MSUD, just not anywhere near what a person without transplant would have. There was a study that found that protein synthesis is similar between people with MSUD and people without MSUD. So, there's no real indication that there's a problem with muscle protein synthesis in MSUD. But we also know that when leucine levels rise, that's very dangerous for us. We also know that when we're exercising, there is muscle protein breakdown. So the big question is, does that muscle protein breakdown raise branched chain amino acid levels? The way we lower branched chain amino acid levels is by using those amino acids to make new proteins. So it could be that as soon as they're broken down, they're used to make new proteins and that blood levels don't rise at all. And that's what we're going to be looking at in our study. All I can tell you is that, as I mentioned earlier, there have not been reports of people who are physically active, including young kids playing on soccer teams, as well as adults who are going jogging. No reports of people having an elevation of blood sugar to a dangerous level during physical activity. So I think we can be reasonably assured that under most conditions, that's not going to be a problem. But again, we want to be mindful. We have to be mindful that the best way to reduce muscle protein breakdown is make sure we're having carbohydrate and enough calories before that physical activity. So our best advice for anyone who wants to be physically active, we do have tip sheets that we're going to email to you. But again, it is critical that you make sure you're eating enough calories for normal needs as well as physical activity. Now, I know that a lot of people, especially adults, want to use physical activity to help with weight management. And if we're talking about maintaining our weight, no problem. But if we're talking about trying to restrict the number of calories that we're eating while we're exercising so that we can lose weight, again, that has to be done under the guidance of your clinician, and would most likely require more frequent blood sampling. Distribute your metabolic formula throughout the day so that you're getting that protein at regular intervals throughout the day. Include foods with carbohydrates with all your meals and snacks. Consider a sports drink for long duration exercise. That's going to help minimize muscle protein breakdown, as well as helping to keep you hydrated. We want to make sure that we're hydrating so that our urine is clear and adequate, meaning we're urinating at regular intervals. And there's a website here that you can use for more information on hydration. We don't recommend using dietary supplements, especially something like creatine or energy boosters, unless you've discussed it with your clinician. And I can tell you that even for a very high level elite athlete, the benefit of a supplement is going to be minimal as compared with the benefits of a well-designed diet. So you should not, again, feel that you're at a disadvantage if you can't take those products. Okay, I am now ready to answer questions, so I will stop here.
Looking at the questions here. One of them you actually did already address, which was how to build muscle on a low protein diet. And so the next one though is there any kind of sport or exercise that you would recommend steering away from with MSUD that was not discussed?
Well, the thing is that the higher the intensity and the longer the duration is when a person might be more likely to get into trouble. And so if you're going to do anything, like train for a triathlon, for example, you would really want to do that under the guidance of your metabolic clinicians so that they can be monitoring your blood levels. And you also want to be making sure it's very difficult to know just how many calories you need. So again, working with your dietitian as well to make sure that they're properly evaluating your body's energy needs and that you're delivering it throughout the day. But again, the bottom line is the longer the duration and the higher the intensity is when we're going to see more metabolic straining. It's going to be more of a strain on your metabolism. So we would have to be really careful under those circumstances.
That makes a lot of sense. It definitely creates a lot more energy needs
Yeah.
when you're doing those very physically intensive things, and especially the hydration piece. I mean, from my own experience, I cannot impress that enough going into it and during. Then Jordan has here in the chat, are there any fruits and veggies that would be better than others for pre or post workout exercise?
Can you explain that a little more? What are you better in what way? Can we allow people to unmute?
I can take her off.
Okay.
Let's see here. She's just said she's just looking for suggestions. So are there
Yeah.
ones that are more carbohydrate heavy that are lower in protein? I mean, since that is kind of what we'd probably want to lean
Right.
towards.
Right.
Are there things that
Yeah.
you would recommend?
Yeah, I think in terms of the protein content, you just want to be mindful of staying within your prescription. There's really no difference in the carbohydrate content. What varies is the portion size. So, for example, one medium-sized banana might be equivalent to, 3 or 4 clementines. So it's really just a question of the portion size, but I wouldn't say that one is preferable over another. When it comes to vegetables, if you're thinking about before exercise, you just want to be mindful, well, I guess with fruits too, of the fiber that can cause some GI distress for some people. And so we always tell athletes to make sure that you're practicing during training with whatever your nutrition strategy is going to be so that you can make sure that you tolerate it. So, your child might be one who can eat an orange and then go right onto the field and have no problems at all. Whereas someone else, if they ate an orange and ran onto the field, they might have some, abdominal distress. So that's more of an individual thing. I hope that answers that question.
I think that does. There was more of a comment here. Melanie had shared with us that she's going to be allowing her son more Gatorade. So
Very good. I know
during
people think that Gatorade is a bad thing. It's so unhealthy. And, I mean, it is not, it was not developed for the way it's being used now, which is, I once had a patient who had diabetes who was telling me he was drinking Gatorade when he was mowing his lawn. I'm thinking, oh my goodness. It was designed for sports performance, not for an everyday drink. But of course, now it's being marketed more as an everyday drink. But if you're an athlete, let's say you're going to go in the pool and you're on the swim team and you're going to be swimming 2 miles or something, the sugar in that Gatorade is getting used up right away by your muscles. So it's not causing all sorts of problems in your body that might be a concern for someone who is sitting on the couch watching TV while they're drinking their sports drink.
these are all very good needs. Don't oh, there's one more question that came in here. Instead of power drinks, are there any advantage of using long chain carbohydrates for long training sessions?
That's actually very controversial. They actually tend to cause more GI problems for many people, and they're not the scientists who spend their lifetime researching these things have not identified them as anything that's beneficial over a traditional sports drink.
Mostly heard of in that context, so it was helpful. Thank you. I don't see any other questions. So I think
Okay.
there aren't any more.
Well,
I think the questions we had were very good, though. And I think just to reiterate Dr. Dolan's point here from the beginning that this is, that anything that you take and do after this meeting, that you go back to your care team and discuss with them. Oh, one more came in here. Are there specific low protein foods that are better for satiating while trying to lose weight?
oh gosh, that's an excellent question. And I'm not sure that I can answer it because, um, clearly the things that are going to be more satiating are things that have more fiber and fluid in them. So that's why we think of fruits and vegetables. And like I like to make vegetable soups, for example, which can be very satiating and low in protein. When it comes to all the low protein products, the breads, the cereals, those kinds of things, they are pretty caloric, which all that means is that we need to be mindful of eating them within our energy prescription. Um, so I think your best bet is really to work with your dietitian. Let your dietitian tell you what an appropriate amount of calories is for you, given your level of physical activity. I always like to say you always want to feed your active times. And if you are going to cut back on calories, you want to do that at times when you're less active. So, you have your pre-workout snack and your recovery snack after, and then maybe with your clinical team's permission, if you want to cut down on calories at other points of the day, that would be a better time to do that.
I have actually an extra comment to that just because I've been on and off this journey for a long time. And one of the things that I know my dietitian discussed is the quality of the food, thinking potato chips versus an actual potato. And you're going to have a much lower volume of food for the same amount of protein that's in potato chips versus a potato. And the actual potato would be a much healthier option versus the potato chips. And you're going to get a lot more for that same caloric protein value. So thinking about, is there another form I can be having this delivered in? that's going to make it, more filling, because
And I'm really glad you said that because, I know, I think we all recognize how important it is to, since the diets do rely so much on the formula and the low protein foods, to add more whole foods as much as possible. So in Danae's example, the potato is a whole unprocessed food. The potato chips is clearly a highly processed food. We want to be going with the unprocessed or less processed item as much as possible for both reasons of satiety. As Danae said, it's going to be more satisfying and also for overall health.
And then I have a question that I know comes up a lot in the different threads I've seen online. And one of it is that question is it true that if you cut too many calories, it can actually be counter to losing weight? Can it actually stall that? Can it hold fat actually and make it harder to lose weight?
And I'm trying to think how to explain this simply, but the body is very responsive to changes in energy intake. The body wants to maintain its weight. And so if you are under eating and then exercise, the body sees this as a threat. So it's going to slow down and it's going to slow down things that it can get away with. So for example, in an extreme case, that's why women would lose their menstrual cycle, because we don't need to be worrying about reproduction. That's not something that's essential for our survival. People who are under eating feel cold more readily because we just can't, the body is conserving energy and it takes a lot of energy to keep our body warm. So the body definitely does react to changes in energy intake. And that's why, again, you need to be very, very careful about strategies to lose weight and work with your clinician to make sure that there just isn't too big a gap between the amount of energy your body needs and the amount of energy you're giving it.
That was a great explanation.
Thank you.
Well, think that's it. I don't see any more questions trickling in here. And so I want to thank everyone who submitted their questions. This has been a very valuable exchange for both MSUD and HCU. And I want to thank Dr. Dolins for her time. And I think now I am going to turn it over to Denise for our closing remarks here.
Thank you, Danae, and thank you again, Dr. Dolins, for sharing your expertise with our communities this evening. On behalf of the MSUD Family Support Group and the HCU Network America, I want to express our deep appreciation to everyone who joined us tonight. This was really a great conversation, a lot of good questions, and a wonderful presentation. And a special thank you to our sponsor, Nutricia, for their ongoing commitment to supporting education and connection within the rare disease community. We hope you'll stay connected with us for future webinars in 2026 and community initiatives designed to inform, inspire, and empower families living with both MSUD and HCU. Thank you again for spending your evening with us, and have a wonderful night.